This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simulation Nation. This episode today, we are going to be talking more about students and faculties playing the role of the standardized patient in your simulations. This episode was actually requested to just understand what are best practices when it comes to incorporating different students and faculty members into the simulation process. And I think that this is really common because people don't want to have to start an SP program from the very beginning. That's, again, they might not have the time, the resources to be able to do that. And so they want to include live people, and this kind of seems to be the easiest option, of getting started.
Sure. And I think that, again, like, if you think of starting with SP programs, it is really kind of like a step-to-step program. So a lot of SP programs start with people are recruiting their family members.
Yeah.
Hey, could you come in? Mom, you're retired now. Could you come in? And you were recruited by me as a 16-year-old to be a standardized patient. So there's that's one way. And in actuality, I think that's a little bit easier because if the students are not familiar with that person, the learners are not familiar, or it's not someone that is, normally in a cohort or they're rubbing shoulders with in the hallways. It makes it a little easier.
I think it's also easier to set up the training program too, because then it's kind of like, hey, I'll just come over to your house for an hour and we'll go over the simulation beforehand.
Right.
Versus
or if you have two or three that you meet somewhere for tea or something like that.
Yeah, you guys can, your neighbor, you guys can kind of meet up and be able to do that. So yeah, I agree. I think that's sometimes because that's the easiest, I can just stop over. I can hand you off the simulation. We can talk about it. We can go over it. We can do some training and exercise with it. And then I'll have you come in on Monday and, you'll do the sim.
And I do think that's one way. But the other way is that potentially you as a faculty member are really bought into the idea of having live people in simulation, especially if you've bought our wearables. And you're like, well, I don't have any other standardized patient. So how am I going to do this? And typically, because healthcare faculty know a lot about patient presentations, it's almost assumed that it's going to be a little bit easier. But I think, you mentioned the best practices with this. We're not coming up with these best practices because we obviously, though we're in the research, we haven't created them. But Association of SP Educators, so they now use just SP Educators, but they have come up with standards of best practice for integration of standardized patients.
Or live people. And I think that's where I want to be really clear with that, is that just because they are a faculty member or another student or a family member, you still have to follow the same standards best practice. Really, it is including a live person in simulation. The goal of them being there is to fill that role of the standardized patient. So just because you're not calling them that or it feels a little informal doesn't mean that you kind of get to skip over the standards best practice. And they're there for a reason. I think that's the other part. They're not these rules to confine you and make it harder. They're really there to make it easier and get the results you want. So I think that part of it is not looking at it as like, oh, well, we got to do this because we're using live. It's like, no. Reviewing these, incorporating them will actually help you in the long run and make it a whole lot easier because you'll avoid kind of the pitfalls that people who in the early days who didn't have them fell into because we didn't have the standards to go back to and review and things like that.
I mean, and again, like you said, just like in healthcare, if you follow best practices, you will have the best outcomes for your patients. Here's the same thing. If you follow best practices, you will have the best outcomes for your simulations. And one of the biggest frustrations for me when I was doing mannequin simulation was that I would put all this work and effort into it, but then at the end when we would do a debriefing, the students would say, well, if it was a real person, I would have said that or done that. And it feels so defeating that you put all this work and effort in and then you don't get the result that you're hoping for. And so I think that in the same way of just taking those few extra steps is going to make this so much easier. So we talked about this before we came on air, but one of there's some very essential components of ASPE standards of best practice. A few of them may not be as important when you're just getting started, but as it grows, you'll begin to need to operationalize things a bit more. But the patient safety
is domain number one.
Yep. So that, thinking about that, now you now have another live person in that simulation. So you have to consider the psychological and physical safety of the person that's playing the role as well as your learner. So
yep. Now you've got double duty with needing to make sure that they are both safe in that simulation. And again, it's a very different type of safe when you're talking about having someone play the role of the patient versus having your learners. So it is a different way of thinking through it, but there are the ability to kind of look into it a little bit more and understand, oh, okay, this is why we need to check on these different things. But safety is the first domain, character development, and training. So those are the three areas that you need to make sure when you're including a live person that you're covering all of those bases. So with training, the main thing that I like to focus on with that is when you're going into your training process, just because they are a student or a faculty member coming in and playing the role doesn't mean that we can just give them a note card and say, okay, you've got 5 minutes to prepare and then you're going to head into sim, right? We still have to go through the same training process. And I think that that's where a lot of people see a big gap, or at least where I hear a lot of the gaps, is they're not doing a training process, and then when they go into simulation, they're not seeing their desired outcomes. And I think oftentimes it's because there's not spending the time to make sure that they're fully trained before going in, and then once they go in, things can really go off the rails. And we've heard those a lot of when simulations can go off the rails.
And where that potentially can happen, and I don't know that I was guilty of it, but I could see that it happens, is, you have 5 people or 6 people showing up to do a simulation, one simulation, because you have groups, cohorts coming through. And so it's not just one single learner for the simulation. So you need to assign out roles. And so you just assign out that SP role or that
the
family member role or the patient role. And in the end, what ends up happening is you get out of it what you put into it, right? So if they only are getting a note card with little information, what we always say as far as, with our SP work is, if their information, if they have not given the information, they will fill it with what they know.
Yeah.
So people will react to, the same scene, right? The same information being shared with them. Some will be angry, some will be tearful, some will be flat affect, some will be, very
laughing
dramatic,
and giggling in the corner because they're not,
right.
able to keep a straight face.
So if you're only giving little information, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So again, from the perspective of ASPE Standards Best Practice and from our own personal experience, a really fully developed character, and also, I would say, a special attention, especially with student taking on the role of SP, is that they have got to have extra attention put on remaining in character and not, how to respond if the learners start to giggle or if they, because what my theater partner used to say is they will walk into that simulation looking for a friend. They want the side wink. They want the
this isn't real. It's okay.
So if you, and I have literally had students that were roommates. I had no idea that my SP was the roommate of one of the learners, and they got all the way through that simulation and full seriousness because the SP, the person that was playing the role of the patient, stayed in character the whole time.
Yeah.
So if you work very hard on them staying in character, maybe even practice it a little bit in a dress rehearsal with them of, a student trying to take it not seriously, what would they do? I think that would be helpful, get you to that standardization phase or that standardization role.
And I do think that if you want more information on our character descriptions and what we mean when we say developing out that character, you can go to our episode 1 of this season 2, and that will give you kind of a full hour on what we're talking about when we're discussing a character description and what that means. I do think that there's 2 different ways of looking at this. So if we were to include faculty and students who were very close to learners, like you said, looking for a friend, they know each other, I think that's one avenue. There's also the avenue of incorporating people who they may not be as familiar with. So thinking about graduate level faculty members, thinking about students that come from different disciplines that might come in and be involved as the standardized patient. But I think where people see that maybe as intimidating is the training process. But what we're saying is, giving them that note card 5 minutes beforehand, you're really not going to see the desired outcome. So putting in the effort ahead of time to work with different faculty members and different students might lead, well, again, we've seen in literature that it will lead to better outcomes because they do not know who that person is or they don't recognize them.
Yeah, and I will say that a majority of this training on standardization, feedback, all the different aspects that is talked about in the training piece of the Standards of Best Practice, that could be done asynchronously. So it could be an online course on Canvas or Sakai or Blackboard or whatever you have.
Or if you're looking for something, Avkin has certificates that will train people to be the role of the standardized patient that's already developed online and ready to go.
Make your life easy. But you could create an asynchronous course, but at the end of it, you still, I think, need to have that element of meeting with them and going over
They have
pieces.
to practice. I will say that from doing this so many times, even with seasoned, trained, standardized patients, and this was one of those things you learn from experience, but over the years when we would ask, hey, you feel good? You know what's coming? Yeah, feel great. Know exactly what's coming. Put them in simulation the first time, and you're watching in the control room going, that is not at all what I thought we were on the same page about. They have to practice. Even if they say, I'm good, I don't need to practice, they need to practice. And you need to see it because you need to offer them coaching notes and you need to be able to modify them. I think that's the other piece of it is that you have to remain in control of what's happening. When you kind of let it loose, that's where those stories of things going off the rails happen. So if you have the ability of teaching them asynchronously, but then bringing them in to go over the specific simulation you're going to do as well as practice, that's where then you're going to see that magic of putting in the time and the energy where you're going to actually really see a quality simulation happen where everyone in the room is engaged, they're learning, and everybody feels psychologically safe in that situation.
Yeah, and I would say another big thing that you could do to make that training easier, so if you have multiple people playing the same role, is having the next person coming and observing the first person so that they're understanding, okay, this is what the learners are going to be doing. So if you can have them observe
anyone
that.
who's playing the role of the patient, if they are able to come in and watch one another play that role, I know that's not always possible with schedules and timing and payment and all of those other things, but it does help with standardization across the board. That's why we also recommend that if you are going to do training on a specific simulation, that you're bringing in all of the SPs together to practice. So if you have 4 people playing the role of the patient John, they're all coming in for that 1 hour to then go over the role of the patient John and practicing and things like that.
Right. And I will say in certain circumstances, like one of our SPs was in a class or was not able to attend, we would record that session so they got to see the other 3 playing the role and then still do their own session. So they got to see the feedback that we gave to the other 3, and then we would do a quick dress rehearsal with just them. So there are ways to get around it or ways to work through it if it doesn't always work in the way. I know that when COVID hit, getting everybody in the room was a hard time. So sometimes they would do things virtually. Again, I think that you can be creative with that, but it is something that you do need to spend some time on. And what I always say with work with mannequins versus SPs, like if you think of operations within the sim center, is you put a little more work in up front for SP work, but once it's humming, it hums. Yeah. And you don't have to put in nearly the effort that you do, to re-rack and get things and, get your mannequin back online and things along those lines. So it is a little more upfront work, so you do have to account for that. But it is, at the end of it, you get so much more quality out of it because you have put in that upfront work, and the learners are more satisfied and the experience is more exceptional. I will say that there's lots in the literature as far as if learners are portraying the role of an SP
of a patient
of the patient, because they now are seeing things through the eyes of the lens of a different person. And again, more on character descriptions in that first episode, but it is really kind of, they're taking on a different character and they're understanding the patient's perspective. One thing in the literature that came out that I think is really, think about this in a operational role as far as how you would approach this. But the farther removed, if you think of like points of connection, the farther removed that live role player or that live person is to the learners, the more realism it is going to feel. So if you think about faculty, if you as the simulation faculty that you see the students all the time, if you're playing that role, it's a little less realistic and authentic, right? Like think of a patient with spinal cord injury, and you obviously have been walking around the sim center, you know, so that's you know, that realism of that patient, it's going to be a little harder for their amygdalas to buy into it.
And I think that's normal human things. I think that in sometimes we're expecting students to really stretch this concept of like, no, pretend it's not me, really buy in that this is the patient. And I don't think that's normal. I think that if we were asked to, like, I know for me with years of experience as an SP, if my husband came in and it was going to be like, oh, okay, you guys are now doing this together, there is this element where it's much harder to see him as a different person than who he is, right? Because it's harder to stretch that. And I think that those are the pieces that if we're not actually addressing that and really like being honest about it, I think in some ways we are expecting some things from the students that we wouldn't necessarily expect from ourselves. Because I would think that if I put two faculty members in and I was like, okay, one plays the role of the patient, one plays the role of the learner, and I put them in, we'd have to do a few takes. Like I'd have to do that a few times to be like, okay, guys, like, you know, make sure you're not laughing, make sure you're not, you know, but then to expect
literally
to put...
the entire reason that I started the SP program was because when I first started and we had mannequins, I say, just talk to it like it's a real person, and I couldn't understand, like they weren't interacting naturally or normally. And then I went to do a demonstration and I struggled to talk to the mannequin normally. And I thought, if I'm struggling and I've been a nurse for 25 plus years, how could I expect these learners who have very limited clinical experience to actually interact with a mannequin like it's a person? I mean, go to the mall and try talking to those mannequins. Like, it feels awkward. And so, like, I totally get the idea that it is hard for your brain to shift. I mean, I think
sometimes like what I've heard is that they blame it on immaturity, or they blame it on them just like they're just not taking it seriously. But I do think that there's an element of if you challenged yourself to say, okay, you go in with another sim faculty who you are very close to and you work with every day, it's going to be a challenge. And I think that maybe that is something where we're not seeing it through that lens because we're not being asked to do it. But if you do challenge yourself to do it, I think you'll kind of see why it makes it a little harder, and why if you are bringing in someone that they aren't as familiar with or not as comfortable with, that there is going to be a little bit more of a layer removed that then will help them get into the simulation, not be as close to it, and again, not break that role between the two.
Right, but if circumstances are what they are, then I think it's very important that you are letting the students know in advance that there will be a sim faculty member as the standardized patient. You don't need to introduce them or tell them who it is.
You should not introduce them.
Right. But I'm just saying that, like, you do need to put that in the pre-brief up front that, hey, there's a sim faculty member in there that will be, you know, your patient, and I want to let you know so that you're not surprised when you walk in the room. I do think emotionally preparing them for that, because there is, you know, again, I always say that I wish that when I got my job at the university, somebody had explained to me that now that I'm in the role of an instructor, there is some power dynamics. And maybe that's obvious for everybody that's listening to us, but we do need to make sure that we're leveling that playing field and giving them as much.
Yeah, no, I do think that that's an important piece that needs to be talked about, because if you do say there's a sim faculty in there, there's going to be a shudder across the room. There's going to be you know, and everyone's going to be more nervous than they were beforehand. And I think that can come with an SP, just a regular having an SP in the room, but I also think it comes more from having that in the power dynamic that's there. And I do think that that's, again, something that we can't correct for everything, and we're just going to have to do our best with what we have. But I do think that there needs to be note of a power dynamic that can happen. So that also needs to be included in considering feedback, as well as, you know, all these other areas that in the debriefing process, if you have someone who's maybe sharing harsher feedback and they have a role of a faculty member, it's probably going to be taken a little bit harder than of it being someone who they don't recognize and don't know.
Yeah. I would say, I will say that there was a time where an SP was not able to make it to sim. There was some type of, I don't remember what it was, and I had to jump in the role of the SP. I didn't try to debrief the simulation and give feedback from the SP perspective. I let someone else debrief it because, you know, I did want to give feedback from the SP perspective. So that's the other piece, is trying to manage all of that. I can imagine that would be really hard to do if you were trying to debrief the simulation as the faculty member, or instructor, and then also to be playing the role of the SP. So choose one.
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to do both. I do think that that's very hard from the learner's perspective to take it as you debriefing, but then also taking your feedback from an unbiased, perspective.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about the concept of what are the differences between using someone they're more familiar with and someone who's different. Let's go through some of the options for people who wanted to include someone who maybe the students aren't as familiar with. What are some of the options? I know that there's some research that was done with bringing in medical students who were performing the role of the patient in nursing simulations, and bringing in some different disciplines. And I think that this is a really great opportunity to kind of almost have this shared program amongst the different disciplines of being able to have med students, being able to have respiratory therapy, social services, there's all across the board of people who would want to participate in simulation.
Yeah, anybody that's actually even pre-health professions, or they think they might want to be. There's a lot of people that want to go into healthcare, but they're not sure what aspect. So they take, it's called a pre-health professions undergraduate course. And so that's a great opportunity for them to kind of see the different disciplines, how they, different. Again, if you have SPs amongst multiple disciplines, or you have interprofessional simulations even, but they get a bird's eye view of what healthcare is like, and they also get to then see things through the eyes of the patient.
And so having that as the option to be able to work through having, bringing in respiratory to fulfill a nursing, and then again, kind of swapping that role, it is very helpful because they're not as familiar with them. You can go through the training course during one of their classes that they already have. The one thing that I would emphasize, though, is they need to volunteer to want to be a part of being a standardized patient, especially when it comes to participating in a different healthcare professions sims. Because if that person is not bought in and they don't want to be there, and basically they're being told, you signed up for this class, but now part of you being in this class is you have to participate in sim, you're going to have standardization all over the place, because you'll have the students who are super engaged and like, this is so much fun, I'm so excited. And then you're going to have the students who are, I'm here because I was told I have to be here. And so you want to have it where it is an opportunity for the students to say yes or say no. The other component there is the psychological safety. We don't know the backgrounds of all of the students. We don't know what they're comfortable playing and what they're not comfortable playing. And when you do have it a little bit more pinned in of you're going to fulfill a role in nursing simulation and here's the sim that you're going to do, we don't really have, they are not required to report to us what their background is and why they don't want to play the role. So they do still have to have the opt-in, opt-out option where they are not being told that they have to perform in simulation.
Yeah, so in the opt-in, opt-out option, the way that we did that is we just spent 10 minutes explaining the simulation. If there was anything that they would, if there's any wearable simulator that they were going to be using, or if they were going to
think of a birthing, like, again,
soft
something more
restraints were going to
sensitive.
be applied, or if they were going to have an IV, we would bring all of that with us. And it was kind of like beginning of the semester, just getting started. And because you want to know then if there's anybody that has some type of issue, especially if you think of mental health simulations, right?
And that is growing more and more from when we were even started, where when we started being able to portray a mental health sim that we had 4, fairly basic ones, and we had very few people who said it was too close to home, that they had someone close to them or a family member or something like that. By the end of our experience at University of Delaware with the SP program, I would say we were having a much larger chunk opting out of those simulations because they did have a situation of a family or close member.
Unfortunately.
And so keep that in mind.
I do think we didn't do a great job in the beginning of giving the opt-in, opt-out situation until Standards of Best Practice came in, and then we really realized that we needed to give them that. But I will say, even from when we started in 2017 when the standards came out until I finished teaching in 2021, maybe 2022, I don't know. But anyway, whenever I stopped teaching, it definitely changed over the course of the several semesters. And I think COVID impacted that as well.
I agree.
But I do think, you do need to let them know what simulations they're being that they're volunteering for, give them different options. And the way that I have heard it operationalized is either they're enrolled in, let's say, an internship. So they're enrolled in a school-wide internship where they get 1 course credit or 2 course credits for doing something. And so that internship, it's like a job, right? So they have to report, and they're given a schedule and they have to report, and they're graded on their attention to detail and things like that. So having it as an internship. There's also programs that have a community service requirement. So they have X amount of hours as far as community service goes. This can fulfill their community service requirement, especially if you think of, if you think of pre-health professions, if they're really interested in healthcare, but they're just not sure, this could be very appealing to them of like, let me do this as a community service because it's going to help me see potentially, am I really interested in healthcare? And, potentially choose a discipline. I will say that the course that we taught, and it was different. It was actually a created course that was approved by the university, but we had students that changed majors into nursing from taking that course and seeing what nursing does, and then students that chose to take more theater classes because they really loved what they were doing and it was an outlet for them, right? So there is huge benefit to the idea of having some type of way to give them something back rather than just like, hey, cool, we'll buy you lunch at the end of the semester if you donate 20 hours. There are some people that love it enough to do it.
And that's the thing, is that there are very successful just volunteer programs. So I would say don't shy away. If you don't see the roadmap yet, don't shy away from getting started. Get started, try it out. You know what I mean? And it can grow. I think that a lot of times when you start from the very beginning, it feels very daunting and you're not really sure. But it can just be as simple as a volunteer program. And I think that those are the ways that we can ensure that you're following standards of best practice with incorporating a live person. Plus, you get the benefits of them having someone who they don't necessarily know. Plus, you get the benefits where all of these other health professions are interacting together in very unconventional ways, not the traditional interprofessional way. And I think that that's a really cool, is because now they're all gaining and learning from each other. And there's just different levels of respect and knowledge and understanding. I can remember you saying that you didn't really understand pharmacy's role until we did an interprofessional simulation with pharmacy, and you saying, well, if I knew what your role was, I would have called on you guys, way more when I was in the hospital.
I would have had a whole lot of respect.
And yeah, I can remember,
I shamedly admit that as an ER nurse, I would say, well, I can count to 100 and get paid 6 figures. I mean, that's obviously not the right attitude to have, but it was because I worked night shift. I didn't have much interaction with them, and all they would do is, that my only interaction with pharmacy was them sending me meds, and then also with them, with me going to the pharmacy to get my own medication. So understanding all the value that pharmacy brings.
And nutrition, I can remember too, with nutrition, bringing them in.
Learned so much.
But that was the kind of stuff that I think that's another really cool added benefit, that it makes it worth it in the end, because you really do start to see these very dynamic interactions happening between the professions. And again, like you said, we started to see people who would be like, oh, I want to actually change my direction, or I want to take more theater courses, or I want to, like, you really do start to see the fruits of your labor. And the other thing that I would encourage you, if you are starting a volunteer program, especially in that interprofessional kind of way of like this sharing, is make sure that you are getting data and make sure that you are getting self-evaluations from the patients. They are hugely valuable. And as you're going forward and trying to build this, potentially into something more than just a volunteer program or just a 1-credit internship, and you want to kind of take it to the next level, having self-evaluations of what they got out of playing the role of the patient or what they learned. Again, we learned so much about patient advocacy, things like that. Having all of that data ready to go, it's so helpful to get buy-in from other people who weren't there to see kind of all of the things clicking and all of those things happening. And so again, being able to have that information to share is really important.
Yeah, and that was my favorite time of the year. Twice a year, I got to read the self-reflections. And, I had a theater partner, and he would say, I could read them. No, I got it.
And I'll spend my weekend doing it, no problem.
And when I would get ones that were really eloquent, really well thought out, I would ask them if I de-identified them, if I was able to share it. Because we would share some of the, just not the whole thing, but, a couple snippets with others, potential students that we were going to recruit. I would share that up, again, like as you said, to the leadership, the qualitative comments, obviously the quantitative comments as well. But I do think it's so important that you are gathering data from the learners about the experience, and the way that we did it was we took Kim Leeton's Set M. It's now on healthysim.com. They have an evaluation tool section there. But at the end of their experience, whether, depending on what simulations they had done, if they were all SP or if it was SP versus mannequin, we would ask them to do a Set M on how much they learned. And especially at the end of their senior year, we'd ask them to reflect back clinical experiences, web-based, AR, VR, mannequins, SPs live, SPs virtual, SPs with wearables, and just rate how impactful that learning was. So we saw, basically, is our time worth it? Is what we're doing, what we're asking the students worth it? Are they getting something out of it that they're going to take with them? And the next level of that, again, this is probably a lot for people that are just trying to think about SP program, but is getting survey results from your graduates. I'd love to have done that. I didn't do it, but I would love to have.
The other area that you can think about if an interprofessional option is not necessarily an option, let's say you're at a community college, you're more isolated, you don't have as many disciplines wanting to be involved in simulation or as involved in simulation. Again, there are ways of doing it where you have different levels of learners participating in, senior level simulations or in freshman level simulations, but having it where they're not the same year is very helpful, again, in that same concept. I don't think it's I think that the ideal situation is having the more interprofessional or having someone they're not familiar with. But the next best option is to kind of mix up that fruit basket a little bit and have it where you're having it where you're switching up which cohorts are involved in each other's simulation. So even if that is, senior level involved in sophomore levels and juniors, and the only thing you have to be concerned about is when you go up. So if you bring a freshman to do a sophomore level simulation, well, if you're not going to change that simulation, they're then receiving the simulation and knowing what's going to happen next year when they're supposed to be a participant. So you do have to be considerate of that. But the beauty of how it works in academia is those seniors are going to go on and graduate. So if they come down every year and are involved in the sophomore level sims, and then they go on and graduate, you're going to get your next level the next year, and they're going to come in and it can kind of just rotate itself out. But even considering that for faculty, like you had discussed, having faculty who are not necessarily their classroom teachers or they're as familiar with, trying to create that separation, I think is the next best option if you don't have the interprofessional or a graduate program. We've heard a lot of success of people using graduate level students to come back and do undergraduate, as well as vice versa, undergraduate going and doing graduate level simulations. So there's definitely options there. But if you are in a more limited field, your best bet is to start to change up the cohorts and evaluate that component of it.
Yeah. And that's, it's kind of like the good, better, best, right? But the one thing I will say is that because we had students that were, let's say, pre-PA, and then they changed into nursing. So they would go through they went through our course and they were the patient for the simulations. And then they changed from being a pre-PA student who was not in nursing to now they're an accelerated student and they're doing all of the simulations that they already did. We went and got feedback from those few students that this happened, and they said it was just as hard for us to play the role of the healthcare provider in that simulation, even though we knew what it was like through the eyes of the patient. So if it happens to happen that way, it's not the end of the world, but it is probably, again, for the learners, I think it is much more, it's much easier for them to separate themselves if they are seeing things, if they're meeting people they don't know, just like they would be in real life.
I think it's hard, though, because they do say that, but they never had the experience of going in blind. So I think that's also hard to compare because they don't actually know what it would have been if they didn't have that information. But what I'm saying is
it wasn't a walk in the park, is what
No,
they said.
it definitely isn't, because, again, they're expected to put on very different shoes in that. But I do think that there's an element of, but then going in blind and having no idea what's coming is, I think, also a challenge as well.
I mean, and it like, again, I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that it did happen in a few circumstances for us, and it wasn't the end of the world. And I will say the other piece of this, as far as the thinking about how you're mixing up your cohorts. Trying not to have like lab TAs be the ones, because they again, if they're lab TAs, they're interacting with those students
all the time
in a skills lab all the time. So even though it's different cohorts, they're still very familiar with them. So
Yeah.
the more levels of separation you can have, the better. The other big thing I would say is a lot of times, because they're nursing students, they're taught to come to SimLab with their nursing uniform on and to be in uniform. And if they are coming to play the role of the SP or the patient, you don't want them in uniform because it's going to throw things off. So
it's almost like if you were to watch a play and that the person is trying to play someone and what they're wearing completely does not match what it's going, the entire time your brain is going, this is not right, this is not right, this is not correct. There is a reason why costumes and makeup and all of that plays such a huge role, because it is something with just looking at it and being able to say, this is not correct right now. If you have someone in their scrubs just laying in bed and you just put a hospital gown over them and you can still see the scrubs and things like that, the entire time it's going to keep reminding them that this person is not actually the patient.
I mean, just imagine that you walk into a patient room at a hospital.
And he had scrubs on.
Somebody's sitting there in full uniform, right?
Yeah.
So it does, yeah. And the other thing that I will say is that something that we experienced a few times before our maternal child labs got very sophisticated is the lab TAs would be the family members of the patient, and they would try to over-cue the next learners because they wanted to show their knowledge and their wisdom. And so I would say you have to pay special attention to that. If you have older learners coming back, older cohorts coming back to assist younger cohorts, that you really need to be very specific about what cues are appropriate in the simulation and that you are there to facilitate the debriefing.
Can't have two debriefers. I say that all the time. You can't have two debriefers. And that was something that I saw a lot in consulting, was the same concept where when it was faculty coming in or TAs coming in, and I think TAs are almost more guilty. I really do. But being like, well, what's the blood pressure? And again, that's that like, have you checked that? And I think sometimes it is this wanting to feel competent, like wanting to feel like they have the answer. And so it's like, oh, well, I'm going to teach you the answer. But again, when you're in sim, it's got to be standardized. And so then the other thing that I would always mention when I would do consulting, if they were going to have faculty or TAs, is even if the TA or the consultant or the faculty member is not saying anything, during debriefing, they can't be sitting there as the role of the patient going, yep, yep, 100%.
So for those of you that are just listening online, she's shaking her head up and down and
vigorously up and down, being like, yep, you're going to remember, I just experienced that, I just had that. Like, that's not helpful because it feels like a pile-on then where you have two people, again, like digging at them in terms of what they missed or what they didn't do, right? And so you have
not psychologically safe.
It's not psychologically safe. They have to remain in the role of the patient. They have to remember that. And if they can't help themselves, they need to walk out of the room during that time and then come back in when it's appropriate. But they can't be sitting there piling on or adding in their own experiences, even though they may be like, this is me being very helpful right now. This is me helping them out. It's not. It feels like a pile-on. And so, again, you have to be careful with that when you're including them in that role of the patient as well. And then the last part I just want to talk about is, because I think that this is the common pitfall or the area that's not really being talked about, but the psychological safety of when you are bringing in peers playing the role of the patient and the family member, and the family member. When they're coming in and they're interacting with just their peers, their friends, they're going to go to lunch after this, whatever it may be. There is so much danger in terms of the psychological safety of it being unsafe because they're watching each other make mistakes. They're watching each other, maybe not perform well. And we don't know what that relationship's like outside of classroom, right? We don't know what that relationship looks like. That student could be somebody who really piles on or goes around and starts telling other people that. And we can say what happens in simulation stays in simulation, but these are 20-year-olds who are going to go and they're going to chat and they're going to talk, and to have it where it's exposed of kind of like how poorly you did, or like, again, them saying, yeah, well, when Sarah was doing my blood pressure, she didn't even know to put it on my arm the right way. Like, things like that. It's a very vulnerable thing for students to go in. And again, I think that it can slowly creep into the culture of your simulation program without you even seeing it or really understanding where those undertones come from. But I think that it is something to be aware of, that there is an element of, I think sometimes we lose the fact of how vulnerable it feels to be the participant in simulation and just going in and trying your best, and then to be able to have it where other people can additionally be in there and evaluate you that isn't from the role of a faculty member. It can feel very intimidating and it can feel very vulnerable to have that experience. And I will say that it really only takes 2 or 3 times for that to happen to start to create it where it feels unsafe to, be vulnerable, to be able to make mistakes, feel free to be able to do that. So I don't think that's the situation in every account, but I think that it is something for us just to be mindful of, that it is a different situation as faculty looking at it saying, you know what, I'd like to have a live person in here, or it'd be great to have a family member in here, but we're not really aware of some of the other undertones that can come out.
Well, and I will say that one of the questions that I have gotten asked in the past is if it's a FERPA violation. So that you do have to be very mindful of that. And as a faculty member, you understand what those laws are and what those rules are. And so that is also then something that you would need to begin to share with, if you're having the same cohort do this type of experience. The whole idea of what happens in sim stays in sim, but it needs to be reinforced that because they are now, in a different role and that they are actually taking on a different, they're not the learner in the simulation.
Yeah.
I mean, though they will learn and it will be wonderful, but understanding where the boundaries are and what needs to happen. So not only is it psychologically unsafe, but it is a potential, concern. So, making sure that you are being open and honest about that and that you are sharing that information is super important.
Yeah.
Because just like you said, you don't know what the relationships are outside of the simulation center, though you may have some guesses, maybe, but maybe you don't. And you also don't know what that particular student's going through in their own personal lives. So, I know me personally, I had several interactions with students that because I saw them every semester from sophomore year, I saw changes in behaviors or something, and I would recognize that something was off, and I could pull them aside. Whereas different instructors just had them one semester for, So I was in kind of this unusual circumstance. So I do think that things change, things happen over time, relationships change between students, and so being very mindful of not only the power dynamics between faculty and students, but also student to student
Power dynamics that we may not even be aware of,
right?
In any way, shape, or form.
So again, the maturity level, them understanding that there's ways to do that to make sure that you put fail-safes in there, but also making sure that you're not blind to the fact that it could happen. I think that's what Megan's trying to share, is just just be aware that it could happen. you know?
And I think just don't shy away from using live people in simulation. I think that it's kind of like there are ways to do it, there's successful ways of doing it, but also be mindful that it does add in a whole new layer of considerations that you don't have when you have a mannequin. When you have a plastic mannequin sitting in the bed, they don't go out and talk about the performance of students later on, right?
Well, but students can talk about the performance if they're in the room together, like that
the family member,
Well, just even 2 learners,
Yeah.
But so there is. I mean, again, we this is a topic in simulation and we talk about it, but it's just important to be aware of. And again, that if you put policies and procedures in place, if you put that training process in place, or you utilize the Avkin training, you're going to get yourself much farther. And putting that little bit of work in the front end is going to give you so much more on the back end as far as the simulations go. It's again, if you look through the research, there's so much information on how learners, if they're portraying the role of the patient or the family member, they're developing empathy, they're developing communication skills. Because what happens is, because it's like the movie Groundhog Day, for those of you that are old enough to remember it, but it's like they see the same scene, the same healthcare environment, maybe 10 different times. They're replaying that same scene, so they're seeing how different groups interact in the same simulation. They're learning what they're going to keep and what they're going to take with them into professional practice, because it made them feel better as a patient, or they felt comforted, or they felt reassured, or the things that they're like, ooh, that was really, like, that was a hard, the patient took that information, challenging. So they learn things from a whole different perspective because they're replaying that simulation over and over again for several different times. So again, that's what our learners really talked about in their self-assessment at the end of the simulations.
Yeah. I think it's just finding the right creative ways, following students' best practice, and being aware of the potential pitfalls.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any questions on incorporating students or faculty into simulation, please just let us know in the comments. Again, we love to follow up on that. And if you do want more information on our training program, you can visit avkin.com. Or if you want more information on how to develop a character description, that is Season 2, Episode 1. We'll see you next time.